The corridors of Windsor Castle had a peculiar stillness that night, the kind that made every small sound feel strangely amplified. Thomas Alden, a senior royal guard whose family had served for 3 generations, moved down the east wing with steady, measured footsteps. His boots echoed faintly along the polished floor, the rhythm familiar, grounding, almost ceremonial. He had walked this passage more times than he could count, yet tonight something felt different. The air held a tension he couldn't name, a kind of quiet waiting that prickled at the edge of his instincts. Thomas had learned not to ignore instincts. Men in his line of duty paid a steep price for doing so. His route this evening took him past the Royal Children's Suite, a section of the residence he approached with a particular reverence. Prince George, Princess Charlotte, and Prince Louis were, in many ways, the heart of the modern monarchy. Even the most hardened guards softened slightly when speaking of them. George, especially, carried a weight he did not fully understand, yet a quiet seriousness behind his curious eyes, the early signs of a future king. Thomas paused as he reached the entrance to the children's wing, listening for any sign of unrest. Nothing. Not a whisper. It should have comforted him, but instead it deepened the odd tension he had felt since beginning his shift. He adjusted his uniform coat, ensuring the buttons were straight, then glanced toward the tall arched window at the end of the hall. A pale ribbon of moonlight spilled across the floorboards, faintly illuminating the royal crest embroidered on the carpet. Everything looked as it always had, and yet he resumed his patrol, moving with practiced silence. His father had been a guard before him, and his grandfather as well. Growing up, he had spent countless hours listening to stories, some noble, some harrowing, told across a kitchen table worn smooth by time and duty. His father had always emphasized that the true measure of a guard wasn't in battles fought, but in dangers prevented, in the quiet moments where vigilance made all the difference. As Thomas reached the junction where the east wing met the central corridor, he heard it, a faint metallic click. He stopped mid-step. It was soft, almost dismissible, but it was there. His hand drifted toward the radio, clipped at his belt, but he hesitated. The sound could have been anything, a shifting pipe, a settling doorframe. The castle was old, after all, and yet something in the controlled precision of the click told him it was deliberate. He took a slow breath, letting his senses sharpen, and listened again. Silence. Too much silence. He walked back toward the children's wing, slower now, every footstep placed lightly. When he reached the hallway entrance once more, he paused and scanned the length of it. Nothing was out of place. The framed portraits, generations of monarchs, soldiers, and statesmen stood in their usual stern watch. The tall white doors to the children's rooms were closed, each adorned with a discreet brass plate. He moved toward Prince George's door. The stillness around it felt heavier than the others, as though the air itself had thickened into a held breath. Thomas leaned in slightly, listening. No sound, no movement, but the memory of that metallic click nagged at him like a thread pulling tighter. He stepped back, reminding himself of his training. A guard does not assume danger where there is none, but neither does he dismiss the uncommon. A soft hum drifted through the corridor, distant, mechanical, like a ventilation unit switching on somewhere deeper in the castle. He told himself that must have been the cause of the noise, that he was simply overtuned tonight. Still, he made a note to check the maintenance logs when his shift ended. Thomas turned, preparing to continue the rest of his patrol, when a door at the far end of the hallway opened quietly. Lady Margaret Ashford, one of the night governesses assigned to the children, stepped out. Her appearance was as immaculate as ever, dark navy dress, hair pinned neatly, expression calm but alert. She startled slightly when she saw him, pressing a hand to her chest. "Oh, Thomas, I didn't expect anyone in this hallway yet." He straightened. "Routine patrol, my lady. It's a quieter night than most." "Quiet." She repeated the word thoughtfully, then offered a faint smile. "That's always a blessing." But something about her smile seemed strained. Thomas nodded politely. "All is well with the children?" "Yes," she said quickly. Too quickly. "They're all resting peacefully." His gaze shifted ever so slightly toward George's door. Margaret noticed. "Is something the matter?" she asked, her tone even but her posture tightening almost imperceptibly. "I heard a sound earlier," Thomas replied. "A metallic noise, Nothing concerning, most likely, but I wanted to ensure everything was secure. Margaret's eyes flickered not with fear, exactly, but with something close to apprehension. These old halls play tricks, I'm sure. But thank you for checking. She began to move past him, her steps measured. Thomas stepped aside to allow her through, but as she passed, he sensed that her calm exterior was holding back something else, something unsettled. He almost asked if she needed assistance, but before he could, she dipped her head politely and disappeared around the corner. The moment she was gone, the strange tension in the corridor deepened again, like an invisible presence pressing against the walls. Thomas resumed walking, but his mind was no longer entirely on his route. The noise, the stillness, Margaret's fleeting unease. Alone, each detail was harmless. Together, they formed a pattern he didn't yet understand. At the end of the hallway, he paused once more, glancing back toward Prince George's door. Moonlight illuminated it faintly, casting a soft glow that made the brass plate shimmer. The heir to the throne slept just beyond that panel of wood, a child with a gentle smile and far too much expected of him. The thought steadied Thomas, grounding him again in purpose. He turned and continued his patrol, unaware that this seemingly uneventful night would soon become the turning point in a story that would shake the palace from its foundations. Because hours from now, guards would uncover the truth behind that midnight sound, and Prince William would learn who tried to enter his son's room. The castle shifted into a different kind of quiet after midnight, a hush that felt heavier than the calm Thomas Alden had grown accustomed to. He had walked these corridors for years, memorized the way certain sconces flickered and how the old stone breathed when temperature changed. But tonight the silence held an edge, a curious tightness that made the fine hairs at the back of his neck rise. The single metallic click he had heard earlier still pressed against his mind like a puzzle he couldn't quite solve. He tried convincing himself it was nothing, a settling pipe or a hinge reacting to cold air, but the castle rarely made noises without reason, and the instinct woven into him by generations of service refused to let the matter go. Thomas turned down the long gallery that bordered the children's wing, his footsteps steady but light. Portraits of old monarchs and forgotten dukes watched him from their frames, shadows settling differently each time he passed them. He had always found comfort in this corridor, its familiarity, its purpose, its proximity to the young royals he silently vowed to protect. Yet tonight it felt as though the walls themselves were listening. He paused midway, scanning for movement, for breath, for anything out of place, but the corridor remained perfectly still. Too still. As he approached the junction where two other guards were stationed, Officer Reese Turnbull straightened immediately. Reese was young but exceptionally alert, the sort who sensed tension even before it was spoken aloud. He narrowed his eyes slightly. "Everything all right, sir?" he asked. Thomas debated minimizing the situation, but Reese's perceptiveness made lying pointless. "Not certain," Thomas said quietly. "I heard something earlier near the prince's corridor. Metallic, intentional, and Lady Margaret seemed unsettled tonight." Reese frowned, not in fear but sharpening focus. "Should we escalate?" Thomas shook his head. "Not yet, but stay alert." Before Reese could respond, Officer Donovan Briggs approached from the opposite hall, holding a clipboard. Donovan was blunt, confident, and intolerant of unnecessary alarm. "Maintenance reports show nothing unusual in your sector," he said in his gravelly voice. "Probably an old hinge settling. Happens in these relics every night." His dismissive tone didn't mask the slight flicker of uncertainty in his eyes. Thomas didn't argue. Experience had taught him that debating instincts only wasted time. Whether Donovan believed him didn't matter. What mattered was the truth waiting to be uncovered. A faint scuffing sound echoed behind a marble column, too soft for anyone less trained to notice. Instantly, the three guards turned. Donovan stepped toward the column first, muttering something about cleaning staff. But his steps slowed as he rounded the corner. Thomas followed, with silent precision, expecting perhaps a stray caretaker. But the corridor beyond was empty. Only a lingering scent of lavender polish remained. Reese's eyes darted across the shadows. "Someone was here," he whispered. Thomas nodded slowly. The castle did not produce shadows on its own. Unable to shake the unease, Thomas returned to the children's corridor, moving faster now, though every step remained controlled. The moment he crossed the threshold, He sensed it again, that invisible disturbance, like the echo of a presence trying to hide itself. A flicker of movement caught his attention at the far end, a quick shadow slipping behind the service door. He briskly closed the distance and pushed the door open, but the small passage beyond was empty. What wasn't empty was the floor. A dark glove lay discarded, elegant leather glinting faintly. Thomas picked it up. It wasn't standard issue. It wasn't staff. And stitched inside the lining was a crest he didn't recognize. Footsteps approached rapidly. Rhys arrived, breath slightly uneven. "Lady Margaret is asking for you," he said. "She seems shaken." Thomas pocketed the glove and followed him. Margaret stood near the children's suite entrance, her normally calm face pale. She exhaled shakily when she saw Thomas. "I didn't mention this earlier," she whispered, "but someone was outside Prince George's room about half an hour ago. Not a child, and not anyone I know." Her words fell like stones into a still pond, each one rippling deeper. "I heard movement again later," she continued, "but when I checked, the corridor was empty." Before Thomas could respond, a sudden thud came from inside George's room. Margaret gasped, hand flying to her mouth. Thomas pressed his ear against the door, breath held. Silence followed, too complete, too intentional. Rhys whispered, "Do we go in?" Thomas shook his head slightly. "Not yet. We need to confirm. If he's asleep, we don't wake him unless absolutely necessary." But the sound replayed in his mind, the heaviness, the wrongness. Something had been in that room, or still was. He could feel it lingering like a ghost behind the stillness. A faint scrape echoed near the service door adjoining the prince's room, a whisper of fabric brushing wood. Thomas moved toward it, slow, deliberate, aware that the slightest sound could change everything. When he touched the door, he felt warmth, a sign it had been used moments before. Someone had been here. Someone who didn't belong. Someone connected to the glove now concealed in his pocket. He stepped back, turning to Margaret and Rhys. His voice was low but firm. "There is someone in this wing tonight. Someone who tried to reach the prince." The corridor seemed to shrink around them, as though the castle itself understood the danger unfolding within its walls. Thomas stood still for a moment, gathering his thoughts, the weight of his duty heavy on his shoulders. Whatever mystery he stumbled upon was no longer subtle. It had taken shape, pressed itself against the edges of the night, waiting to be uncovered. And as Thomas assessed the silent corridor, he knew the truth was closer than any of them realized. Because someone had attempted to enter Prince George's room, the threat was only beginning to reveal itself now. Thomas Alden stood completely still, every sense drawn tight as a bowstring. The silence of the children's corridor seemed to hold its breath with him. The glove in his pocket felt heavier now, as though carrying a hidden truth. Rhys glanced toward Prince George's door with growing unease, and Lady Margaret kept wringing her hands, her usual composure unraveling thread by thread. Thomas knew that something had shifted beyond repair. Whoever had moved through this wing tonight had done so with intention, precision, and the confidence of someone who believed they would not be caught. And that, more than the strange glove or the faint noises, was what unsettled him most. "Rhys," he whispered, lowering his voice so Margaret wouldn't hear the fear he didn't want to name. "Find Donovan. Tell him to secure the west stairwell and check if anyone has passed through in the last half hour." Rhys nodded sharply and sprinted down the hall. Margaret took a slow, shaky breath. "Thomas," she murmured, "you know every person on staff, every guard. I've never seen a glove like that. Not in this wing, not anywhere." Her voice cracked. "Do you think they meant to harm the prince?" Thomas didn't answer at first. He didn't want to speak anything aloud that the walls might remember. The Royal Children's Wing had seen its share of security incidents over generations, but not like this. Not someone slipping through corridors with no footprints, no sounds, no trace, except a glove and a presence felt, but not seen. "I don't know what they meant," Thomas replied quietly. "But they were too close. That alone is unacceptable." Margaret wrapped her arms around herself as though cold. "Someone passed by my desk earlier," she whispered, "but I thought it was one of the senior footmen. The figure moved quickly, too quickly for me to call out, and they avoided the light." Thomas's pulse kicked up. "Did you see their height? Build? Anything?" Margaret shook her head. Only their silhouette. Tall, but not broad. They moved like they knew the castle well. Thomas absorbed that. Someone familiar with the layout. Someone who walked like they belonged here. Someone who could pass behind staff without immediate suspicion. But who? The staff hierarchy was strict and predictable. No one roamed these halls without clearance. And no one loyal to the family would dare approach the prince's room at such an hour. Footsteps thundered back down the corridor. Reese returned, out of breath, face pale. "Donovan's missing," he said in a hoarse whisper. Thomas stiffened. "Missing?" Reese nodded rapidly. "He wasn't at the west stairwell. Wasn't at his post. His radio's silent. I checked every turn leading to the gallery." Margaret gasped. Thomas's hands curled at his sides. A guard leaving his post without reporting was almost unheard of. Donovan was blunt and stubborn. But he wasn't reckless. He would never abandon his station unless something forced him to. Thomas took a slow step toward the center of the corridor, as though positioning himself between the unknown and the children's rooms. "Reese," he said, "secure that door." Reese moved immediately to George's door, pressing his ear against it, listening. "No sound," he whispered. "No movement." Thomas nodded, but doubt crawled through him. The earlier thud hadn't been imagined. Something had struck the floor. Whether by accident or intention, it had been real. Another sound sliced through the corridor, a sharp, muffled voice echoing faintly from the direction of the east receiving room. Margaret flinched. The sound wasn't hostile, but urgent, strained. Thomas motioned for silence. The voice came again, more distinct now, though still muffled by thick stone. Reese whispered, "That's Donovan." Thomas moved swiftly, urging Margaret to stay close behind Reese and away from the shadows. They reached the receiving room door. The faint glow of moonlight seeped in through the arched window, illuminating dust motes hanging in the air. Thomas pushed the door open slowly. Inside, Donovan sat slumped against the wall, shaken but unhurt, rubbing the back of his neck. His helmet lay toppled on the floor beside him. "What happened?" Thomas demanded. Donovan tried to speak, but stopped, breath trembling. "Someone blindsided me," he finally managed. "Came out of the service corridor. Didn't see their face. They moved like they'd trained for this." Thomas crouched beside him. "Did they say anything?" Donovan shook his head, jaw tight. "Just shoved past me and headed toward the inner hallway. I tried to follow, but they were fast." Margaret pressed a hand to her lips. "They were trying to reach George," she whispered. Thomas stood, his heart pounding with a cold mixture of dread and fury. "The question is why?" For a moment, the room fell silent except for the distant hum of the ventilation system. Thomas looked down at the glove he now pulled from his pocket. The crest stitched inside gleamed faintly. It wasn't a family crest he recognized from staff. It wasn't part of any royal security division. But it did resemble a modified emblem used by a private advisory office within the palace, an office known for navigating internal disputes, high-stakes decisions, and political tensions. An office under the influence of certain royal figures who sometimes operated in secrecy. Thomas felt his breath catch. If the glove belonged to someone from that office, then the intruder had clearance to be in the castle, but not in this wing, not near the children. Reese looked at him sharply. "Sir, what does that crest mean?" Thomas closed his fist around the glove. "It means someone with authority or someone connected to authority is involved." Margaret stared at him, horrified. "You mean someone in the palace tried to reach Prince George?" Thomas didn't answer directly. "Someone with access," he said. "Someone who shouldn't be here at night." Before Margaret could speak again, a cold realization swept through the room. If someone connected to a royal office had been in the corridor, someone capable, trained, and familiar with the castle, then this wasn't an attempted attack. It was something more complex, more internal, more dangerous. And Thomas knew that by morning they would have to reveal the incident to Prince William. But what Thomas did not yet know, what the glove did not reveal, was who had come to George's door, and why the truth behind their presence would shake the prince far deeper than any intruder ever could. Morning arrived like a muted drumroll, the first pale light seeping into Windsor Castle with an uneasy stillness. The night's turmoil had not yet reached the wider estate, but within the inner corridors a quiet storm was already gathering. Thomas Alden had barely slept. He had spent the final hours before dawn stationed outside the children's wing with Reese and Donovan, waiting, listening, ensuring that no shadow attempted to cross the threshold again. The mysterious intruder had vanished into the hidden arteries of the castle without leaving so much as a footprint. The glove remained, the only trace a silent accusation lying now in a sealed evidence pouch. As the sun rose, the corridor seemed to tremble with anticipation, as though even the walls understood that the truth, once spoken aloud, could not be undone. Shortly after 6, the footsteps Thomas had been expecting finally approached. Purposeful, controlled, carrying the unmistakable weight of authority. Prince William came into view, still in casual morning dress, expression tense with concern. He looked every inch the father first and Prince second. When William saw the guards assembled outside George's door, his stride quickened. "Thomas," he said, voice low but tight, "you sent word there was an incident. Tell me everything." Thomas exchanged a brief glance with Reese before stepping forward. The silence that followed seemed to thicken the air. "My prince," Thomas began. Shortly after midnight, someone attempted to enter Prince George's room. William froze, eyes widening not in disbelief but in immediate, focused fury. "Was he harmed?" Thomas shook his head. "No, sir. He remained asleep through the night. But someone was here. Someone who moved with purpose and familiarity." William's jaw clenched. "Familiarity? Are you telling me this was an insider?" Thomas reached into his coat and carefully removed the sealed evidence pouch. Inside, the glove rested like a piece of a broken truth. "We found this outside the service door near your son's room," Thomas said. "It carries a crest. Not a department crest we recognize." William took the pouch, examining the emblem with growing intensity. His expression darkened. "This crest belongs to a private advisory office connected to my father," he said quietly, each word controlled with effort. "A division that deals with sensitive internal affairs." Margaret, who had joined them moments earlier, let out a small gasp. Reese exchanged a stunned look with Donovan. Thomas felt a cold realization ripple through him. If William recognized the crest, then the intruder had ties deep within the palace machinery. William continued. "Only a small number of people have access to that office, and even fewer would have reason to be anywhere near the children's wing." Donovan shifted uneasily. "Sir, why would anyone from that office want to approach the prince's room?" William looked toward the closed door behind him, the weight of his responsibility settling visibly onto his shoulders. "Because power makes people reckless," he said, "and desperation makes them bold." He turned to Thomas again. "What exactly happened? Start from the beginning." So Thomas recounted every detail, the metallic click, the shadow slipping behind the service door, Lady Margaret's unease, Donovan's ambush, and the discovery of the glove. He described the silence that felt unnatural, the thud from inside George's room, the sense of a presence moving like a ghost through corridors no stranger could navigate. As he spoke, William's expression shifted from anger to something deeper, an understanding that chilled Thomas more than fury ever could. When Thomas finished, William exhaled slowly, rubbing his forehead. "This was not a random breach," he said. "Someone had a specific purpose. Someone who knew how to avoid detection, how to move inside the castle without alerting staff." He began pacing, agitation mounting. "I have been dealing with internal pressure regarding certain decisions concerning George's early education and his future public role. There were disagreements, strong ones. Some believe I am delaying certain traditions. Some believe I am too protective." His voice thickened on the last words. Margaret stepped forward timidly. "Your Highness, could this be related to that? Someone trying to influence George directly?" William stopped, turning toward her with a bleak expression. "If that's the case," he said, "then someone crossed an unforgivable line." Reese cleared his throat. "Sir, what would someone hope to accomplish by entering the room of a sleeping child?" William did not answer immediately. When he did, his voice was quieter, darker. "A message," he said. "An intimidation tactic. A demonstration that boundaries can be crossed, or—" he swallowed. "Or an attempt to plant something. An item, a letter, a symbol meant to manipulate public or internal perception." Thomas felt a chill spread through his chest. The idea was perverse, but not impossible. The palace's deepest conflicts rarely unfolded in public. They manifested in gestures, symbols, Quiet power plays hidden from the world. William straightened abruptly. I need to see George, he said. Thomas nodded and tapped lightly on the door before opening it, just enough for William to slip inside. The guard remained at the threshold, respectful, listening to the soft rustle of movement. George slept curled beneath his blanket, peaceful and unaware of the chaos beyond his door. William stood beside the bed for a long moment, his hand resting gently on his son's shoulder. When he returned to the corridor, his eyes shone with a new, sharpened resolve. This doesn't leave this hallway, he said firmly. Not yet. Not until we determine who did this and why. Margaret nodded shakily. Donovan straightened. Reese stood ready. Thomas felt his spine align with renewed purpose. William stepped closer to him. Thomas, I want you leading the internal inquiry. You have my full authority to question staff, review security logs, and trace every individual with access to the advisory office. Thomas's pulse quickened, but he bowed his head. Yes, sir. William lowered his voice further. There is someone specific I need you to question. Someone who had a heated conversation with me only yesterday. Thomas waited, breath held. William continued. A senior advisor, someone close to my father's circle. Someone who believes George should already be molded for the future. Someone who has grown impatient with my decisions. Thomas finally spoke. Sir, who? William's answer came quietly, but with the force of a hammer. You will begin with Lord Harrington. Thomas stared at him. Harrington was powerful, influential, embedded deeply within the monarchy's internal structure. Someone who did not tolerate being challenged, and someone who, if involved, would not hesitate to act again. William's gaze hardened. Find out what he was doing last night, he said, because if he was anywhere near this wing, I need to know before the rest of the palace realizes what happened. The corridor fell silent once more, but the calm this time was not peaceful. It was the calm before consequences, and as Thomas prepared to begin his investigation, he realized the truth. The intruder had not finished what they came here to do. They had only begun.